In these final hours, I'm really setting out to people the big choice I see in this election between a country run for the privileged few, another 5 years of David Cameron, an NHS going backwards, child benefit and tax credits under threat, or a country run for working people again. That's what I'll do. And I'm asking people to put their families first, for a higher minimum wage, for free childcare, 25 hours free childcare for 3 and 4 year olds, and a rescue plan for our National Health Service. That's what's on the ballot paper tomorrow.
We'll get onto some of those specific issues in a moment, but you've been saying this for 6 weeks of official campaigning and for a lot longer as well. There has been zero movement in the polls. You are neck and neck with the Tories. So why aren't you making a difference? Why isn't your message getting across?
Well, I think lots of people are still making up their minds. And in these final hours, I'm going to concentrate on those people who are still making up their minds and ask them to think about themselves and their family and what the next 5 years could mean for them.
This is all dependent, of course, on you getting a majority. And I know that's what you're campaigning for, and I know you don't really want to waver from that. However, the polls, which are a lot closer these days, suggest that there is not going to be a party with an overall majority. Would it be legitimate for the second biggest party to form a government?
I'm going to focus on the issues that are left in this campaign,
yes,
and the hours that are left, not on what happens afterwards. We'll have plenty of time afterwards to talk about the result.
I'm not talking about necessarily Labour being the second biggest party, just in theory, the second biggest party, yes or no, would it be legitimate to form a government?
I'm going to focus on the issues at stake in this campaign. And you know why? Because I think politicians are good at talking about themselves, but what we should be doing in these final hours is talking about the British people and this big choice that they face about what kind of country we're going to be.
Yeah.
There are some people, Matt, in this campaign who say this is as good as it gets for Britain. That's what David Cameron says. He says things are fixed, he says things are fine, he reads out lists of statistics about how well everything's going. I don't believe that's most people's experience. And I'm speaking to them and I'm saying to them, we can do better than this as a country. We can do better for you and your family if we put working people first, but not with David Cameron.
Just last time on this legitimacy question, which you're not answering so far, the former Cabinet Secretary, Gus O'Donnell, who was instrumental in forming the coalition last time round, says the party that could put together a majority, not necessarily the biggest, would be legitimate. Do you agree with him, yes or no?
Well, I'm going to leave it to Gus O'Donnell and other people to set out those judgments. As I say, I'm going to talk about the issues at stake for the British people. But I take an old-fashioned view. I think we fight the election and then we deal with the election result. And I'm going to persuade as many people as I can, right down to the wire, about why a Labour government will be in their family's interest.
I think a lot of people would like to know what they're voting for. At the moment, it seems that you're being quite vague. If we take our first viewer question, Chris Hawkins on Twitter says, are we right to believe you wouldn't do a deal with the SNP because if you did, your credibility would be gone?
Chris is right, we're not going to do a deal with the Scottish National Party. We're not going to go into coalition with them, we've been clear about that. And the reason why is because they're a party that wants to break up the country. I believe we should stand up for working people in every part of our country. And for viewers in Scotland, if you want a Labour government, you need to vote for it. Because if for every one less Labour MP there is, it could let David Cameron back into Downing Street, which is, I don't think, what viewers in Scotland want.
But Ed Miliband, as it stands, with even the most conservative of figures, with a small c, that is, you're going to be the Labour leader who lost Scotland.
Well, let's see what happens. We're fighting incredibly hard in Scotland and right across the United Kingdom. And there are two roads for viewers in Scotland. There's the road to a second referendum, because Nicola Sturgeon used to say last year's referendum was a once-in-a-generation experience, and now she's opened the door to a second referendum. Or there's a road to a fairer economy with Labour. An £8 minimum wage, banning the exploitation of zero-hours contracts, a mansion tax which will help the NHS right across the United Kingdom. So that's the plan we offer for people in Scotland and indeed across the United Kingdom.
A plan that is short on detail. You talk about the mansion tax bringing in enough to save the NHS. It's going to fall way short. You talk about a 50% tax rate. That's going to fall way short, according to the likes of the Institute of Fiscal Studies. How are you going to pay for all this?
Well, let me set that out directly, Matt, because we're the only party in this election where every penny of what we're spending is paid for. So on the NHS, we've got a £2.5 billion time to care fund, which comes from a mansion tax on the most expensive properties above £2 million, clamping down on tax avoidance by the hedge funds and money from the tobacco companies. And we've done the figures, and that will pay for 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more doctors, 5,000 more care workers and 3,000 more midwives. And the money will start flowing within months of a Labour government, and I believe that's absolutely what the NHS needs to rescue it from David Cameron and 1 million people waiting more than 4 hours in A&E, nurses saying wards are dangerously understaffed, and I really fear what would happen if he got back in and doubled the cuts next year, which is his plan.
Do you think private money could help the NHS?
I think we should limit the role of the private sector in the NHS, and we want to roll back the tide of privatisation.
Which was started under a Labour government.
Well, we use the private sector for things like the Private Finance Initiative to build new hospitals, but I think he's gone much, much further, and there's deep concern among people in the NHS
The King's Fund says there has been no wholesale privatisation of the NHS. They've called privatisation in the NHS a myth.
Well, there's been a 60% increase in private sector contracts in the NHS.
Yes, from about under 4% to 6%. Right, it's minuscule.
Well, it's a 60% increase, and it's going to get far worse if David Cameron gets back into power. And the really insidious thing about what's happening is that you've got private patient income going up because they lifted the cap on that, and NHS patients going to the back of the queue, waiting longer for their operations, waiting longer for their test results, cancer treatment target not being met. And that will be turbocharged with another 5 years of David Cameron.
But people are still not paying for treatment on the NHS. That's the scaremongering that's coming across from you.
No, but I tell you what is the real danger. It's a two-tier NHS, where if you want timely treatment, you've got to go private. That is what increasingly people's experience is becoming of the National Health Service. That's the real danger of David Cameron.
Another audience question. This is from Nana Adansi Hema, who says she's been voting Labour for 15 years. She'd like to know what you would do for married couples, since a lot of divorce happens because of money issues.
There's a number of things that we would do. We would protect child benefit, which is so important to families with children. We would protect
however many children they have.
We would protect child benefit, yes. I think it's important to support children. We'd protect tax credits, because both of those things are absolutely the bedrock of family finances. And David Cameron, because of his extreme cuts plan, he hasn't ruled out cutting child benefit, he hasn't ruled out cutting tax credits. That's why I say family finances are absolutely on the ballot paper at this election. And if you want to put families first, you need to vote Labour to protect your child benefit, protect your child tax credits.
The Conservatives have brought in tax breaks for married couples. They would bring in more if they get into government again. Ed Ball said you'd scrap that. That doesn't sound great for married couples.
Well, we're going to put the money into a 10p tax rate, which will benefit all taxpayers. But
to the tune of 50 pence extra a week.
The Tories' married couples allowance doesn't help 2 out of 3 married couples. It's not a very successful married couples allowance. In my book, let's support families. Let's support families with children. Let's support family finances. That's what we do.
People feel that you're going to borrow more. Mrs. B on Twitter, another question for you from one of our viewers on 5 News. What can you do to explain the mess the Treasury got into when you were part of Gordon Brown's team?
Well, there was a financial crisis caused by weak bank regulation.
Which you weren't prepared for.
We got it wrong. We got the bank regulation wrong, and I've been very clear about that. But the question for the future, Matt, is who's going to get it right in the future? And that's what Labour's going to do. A balanced plan on the deficit with fair taxes, so reversing David Cameron's millionaires tax cut, reducing spending but protecting key areas like health and education, and also something else, raising living standards for working people with things like a higher minimum wage, which will increase the tax revenues that government gets in.
It's been quite a personal campaign on all sides, if I can just finish off on this. I mean, you've received personal attacks yourself about the bacon sandwiches. I know you've made light of that, about your 2 kitchens, even the way you talk. How does it make you feel? How does it make your family, your wife and children feel?
Oh, I don't mind about the stuff that's thrown at me. What I care about is what's going to be thrown at the British people if David Cameron gets back into power. For me, it's never been about me. It's always been about what we can do for working people in our country. And that's what keeps me going. And that's what keeps me focused on this election. Because I believe that Britain can do a lot better for working families. I think there's a huge choice on the ballot paper. This choice only comes along once every 5 years. And it'll have huge consequences for families, for their kids. I urge people to vote Labour to put their families first.
Has your own brother David wished you luck yet?
He has. We've been in touch during the campaign.
What's he said?
Well, he believes we're having a good campaign. He thinks that we're winning the arguments in this campaign, and he's very much hoping that we win the election.
Ed Miliband, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.